matter into organization, and that such organization as is resulting from these two factors may be regarded as the proper definition of the ensouled man. Now we may say, what have we actually done on the level of our anthropological researches? We have not changed the fact that out of the amoeba, out of the clod, out of the marsh and the mire, there crawls something forth upon the earth. But we may question whether that thing which crawled forth upon the earth was actually the beginning of the total man. We may question whether this being, left entirely to its own devices, could ever have been anything than a super animal. That it rose with others of its kind, that it developed with others of its kind. And as in the case of the embryo before birth, up to a certain point the human embryo cannot be differentiated from the embryo of a chicken or a horse. But as a certain point is reached, then the one indicates gradually and inevitably that it is going to be a chicken. The other remains, continues to unfold, and finally becomes a human being. But at a certain state, they are indistinguishable. There is no way of telling one from the other, except that one grows more before it is born, and the one that grows more is man. Thus, in the face of nature, there is no way in which we could distinguish, or no certain method by which we could indicate a point in the remoteness of things where man and the animal could be clearly differentiated. This would follow again the most ancient thinking we have, namely that in that time there was no obvious difference, but that this difference appeared in due time, appeared when life reached the point of sustaining this difference, and that at that time this difference became manifested, and man suddenly became a creature with a purpose, a creature with a reason for existence other than biological, and that biology did not cease, because the continuance of forms for embodiment continued to be necessary, that the search for food did not cease, because this body, which was to be the house of a soul, had to be maintained and sustained, or the soul was homeless. However, life divided now into two purposes. One, to be regarded as the maintenance of the house, and the other, the increasing freedom of the householder, the being that lived in the house. This immediately divided the life of man into two purposes. Psychologically, these purposes are everywhere obvious. Man is not a united creature in his purposes. He is purposed by two contrary forces. And the conflict between these contrary forces is one of the principal reasons for nearly all the problems that arise in human life. The survival from a bodily standpoint is also sustained by something that we call instinct. Now, instinct is something we do not know too much about. It's one of those delightful things that we should know a lot about, and because we need to know, we cannot find out. But instinct seems to tell us, or our own study of instinct, that in this part of our nature we have the survival of what has been called the pre-Adamite man. That is, the pre-ensouled man. That instinct was the power that governed before the quickening. That instinct, therefore, was a life out of nature, a kind of nature spirit that rose out of the earth and was that part of man's structure that did respond unhesitatingly and continuously to the demands of survival. That what we commonly believe to be instinct today is therefore the survival of a primordial pressure. And that instinct, after it has gone to school and gotten a diploma, instinct becomes sophisticated or cultivated to the degree that it may seem to be a legitimate force that has inherited the real right of ruling the body. Instinct, now not fully recognized in itself, can therefore be the cause of the most excessive positive and negative reactions of our emotional life, our vital life, and certain rudimentary elements of our mental lives. Thus, body left to itself follows instinct. Body and soul follows the soul. The instinct nature of man has slowly become considered under a broad general title, the lower man.
Do not make any.
Now, the lower man is the most agreeable fellow. The lower man is constantly impressing upon us the sovereign importance of doing what we please. The divine man is constantly impressing upon us the sovereign importance of doing that which is right, or that which is necessary, or that which is next. Each of these forces is seeking the gratification of itself, seeking also the fulfillment of its own purposes. Instinct has no over-purpose, because the primary creature seeking to eat ate and was hungry again, because it ate only the food of nature. But the soul man sought another food, that those who ate thereof should not again hunger. And this difference has carried on. It almost would seem, although this may be an exaggeration, and I wouldn't want to be quoted for this, but to the press at least, it would almost seem that what we term materialism is instinct with a college education. That materialism is essentially the aggrandizement of the man of instinct, on the assumption that this man, by piling mountain upon mountain, piling Osir upon Pelion, and piling them both upon Olympus, that he is going to reach heaven. That the instinct man is going to be able to, in some wonderful manner, usurp the prerogatives of the soul man, and thereby gain an immortality or a survival apart from soul. This was a great subject of drama, out of myth, and of legend. But the pattern of it is so rather obvious in our daily living that it perhaps is worth a little careful consideration. That we have, as Goethe says in Faust, two beings within us. One in the earth aspires, and the other to heaven aspires. And these are the two men, Anthropos and Anthropos, the son of Anthropos. And it was by giving man this inward insight of the soul nature, that the powers, personal or impersonal, universal or inevitable, however we wish to so calculate them or define them, having breathed into man the breath of life, made him master of his garden, and gave him dominion over the creatures of the air and of the fields. Now, in giving him dominion, the ancients would say that first of all they bestowed upon man potential dominion over himself. But that this dominion had to be earned, and that this earning was nothing more or less than integrated yearning, that it was yearning backed by purpose, backed by energy, so that these things which man instinctively longed to fulfill might be fulfilled. culture has been defined as man's longing for truth, longing for total internal maturity, and that this internal maturity is the result of a kind of second birth, that by the first birth man was born out of the water and the mud, but by a second birth the Son of Heaven was born in man, and having taken up its abode in man, becomes by natural right the proper ruler of man. Therefore that man must be ruled by this psychic integration, or the self within the body. As a support of this concept, we also have the continuous evidence that man advances most, becomes most certainly secure, when he depends upon the superior phases of his consciousness for his protection and his survival. Man is no longer capable even of thinking of entering into a heavily competitive relationship with the inferior forms of life around him. He is no longer of them. He sees them no longer as like himself. Rather, he perceives that his survival, his security, rests in a battle within his own nature. Therefore, we have a new heaven and a new earth. That new heaven and the new earth, which for man become infinitely more important than the vast heaven and earth of which he is biologically and psychologically a part. That this new heaven is his own inward life, and his new earth is the world into which this life has been placed. That there is therefore the heaven in man and the earth which is the outer part of man. And the great processes, which we now call evolution, arise from not the pressure of incident and accident upon the outer life of man, but the pressure of an inner life to express itself through man. This pressure becomes then the irresistible and inevitable force that has driven man down through the ages, causing him to become ever more concerned with self-knowing, and ever more concerned with not only adjustment to the world, which might presumably be even achieved by instinct, but of a reformation of the world, of a restoration of a better state, and the envisioning of a way of life superior to that which presently exists. These things arise not from experience, because man has not known them. The world we look for is not a world that comes to us from our physical environment, but rather is archetypal of a universal state which preceded our involvement in a material existence. Thus we can assume a parallel, the possibility that anthropology as we know it is not essentially in error, but rather that it is half of a story, and that the other half of the story takes part or takes place behind the line or the veil which divides the external life of man from his internal and eternal roots. Now our time is up, so that's the foundation for the first evening.